Hello. I'm sure it's a great relief to Jake Heppel of Colne, Lancashire, that the police finally have decided that no crime was committed when he had an airplane fly over the Etihad Stadium in Manchester and trailing a banner bearing the legend "White Lives Matter, Burnley." Now, that was in response to the unedifying spectacle of the footballers in the stadium kneeling because of the George Floyd incident. Now, I'm going to say what I shouldn't have to say because it should be bleeding obvious, but I've got to say it anyway, and it's George Floyd should not have died. He was not a good man. He was probably resisting arrest. He was high on drugs, and it's quite possible that he would have died anyway under the most minimal of stress given the cocktail of drugs going round in his bloodstream. He had also just committed a crime. He was trying to pass a forged note. So there's no doubt that Mr. Floyd needed to be arrested. He didn't need to die. He hadn't committed a hanging offence. However, this is ridiculous. Hundreds of thousands of people are dying every day, perfectly innocent people, like those guys in the park in Reading, for instance. But here they're kneeling in memory of a criminal who died in an unpleasant incident with the police, some of which for which he was responsible. You may also note that this guy here is holding his fist up in some sort of Black Power salute. It's not strictly a proper Black Power salute, though. This is what the real thing looks like. The original was in the 1970s. But there's a symbolism here that I think is worth commenting on. I'll get to that in a little while. But to digress, just for a little though, it's sort of interesting that the Etihad Stadium is so called because Etihad is the Arabic word for union. The Etihad Stadium is, I believe, owned by the United Arab Emirates. And the report here, which I'm showing here, is in a journal called the Daily Sabah. Sabah is the Arabic word for morning. That's the AM meaning, not the one that has to do with crying over the dead, although that applies here too, I suppose. This incident it took place in an Arab-owned stadium, and it's being reported in an Arab-owned news medium. And as anyone knows, in the Arab world, Black lives matter least of all and have mattered even less historically. Muslim empires raided Africa for slaves by the millions. There aren't more people of Black ancestry in the Arab world only because any male African slave was castrated straight away at a death rate, I have read, of 8 in 10. And the females were used as drudges or sex slaves, but if they had any babies, they were usually killed at birth. And Black slaves are being traded in Saharan Africa even today. But that's another story. Okay. So this introduces the situation. And what happened was that Jake Heppel and some friends or well-wishers, hearing about the intention to have a Black Lives Matter ceremony at the beginning of the match, pooled some money and engaged an air advertising company to trail a banner over the stadium with "White Lives Matter, Burnley" written on it. What really irked me was the fact that questions were raised that this might have been a crime. Now, people could have said he had this thing flying over the first football match after lockdown, some people might have thought it was insensitive, but they actually investigated whether it was a criminal act. Of course, it wasn't, and I can't see why anyone should have thought it was. But there's some sort of hysterical reaction going on now, and nobody, well, very few people seem to be thinking logically. I believe that I'm thinking logically, but who knows? Police investigating a Burnley football fan who chartered a plane and flew a White Lives Matter banner over the Etihad Stadium say no crime was committed. And then it says here, the Suicide Squad, a group of far-right Burnley fans. The problem here is I don't know whether they're far-right or not, because the newspapers use that about anyone they don't like or who has incurred the displeasure of the establishment. They describe people like Nigel Farage as far-right. He may have opinions that are unpopular with some sections of society, but he is definitely not far-right. Anyway, let's go on. Are believed to have crowdfunded the flight and its message, White Lives Matter Burnley, which flew over the stadium just after Manchester City and Burnley Football Club players had taken the knee in support of the Black Lives Matter movement. Well, you all know what I think of this taking the knee business. Okay, and here we have the instant undercut. Lancashire police confirmed today that Mr. Heppel, now let's just stick the knife in and twist it a bit, Mr. Heppel, who has posted in support of the EDL and has been pictured with its former leader, Tommy Robinson, had not been found to have committed a criminal offence. Just by the by, I have a troll who keeps writing in the comments to ask me why I haven't mentioned Tommy Robinson in my videos whenever I make videos about something that has nothing to do with Tommy Robinson. The reason I don't mention it because it's not relevant. But this time it is. So no doubt this troll chappie will go to sleep a happy man tonight. Now, to continue, here's a picture of the plane trailing the banner. White Lives Matter Burnley. At this point, I could say that's very plain to see, but I won't. And here we have a nice video of it. Now, let's have a look further down, because this is what I really wanted to talk about. While I was reading the article, I saw something that caught my eye. It was said by Burnley captain Ben Mee. Burnley captain Ben Mee said he was shamed and embarrassed of the stunt. That should be by the stunt, by the way. And then a bit lower down, the report continues, I am ashamed and embarrassed that a small number of our fans have decided to fly that around the stadium, he said. It's not what we are about. Well, with respect, Mr. Mee, it is what you're about. On the 21st of June, just one day before the football match, 3 nice men, kind men everyone thought were really good guys, were murdered for what they were. Whether it was for being gay or for being white, I cannot tell, but they were certainly murdered with a lot more intent and preparation than was Mr. Floyd. And I don't see any riots or demos about that, and nobody in Burnley is taking the knee for them. So I don't see why you should say you're ashamed and embarrassed when someone pulls a stunt like that. You could say you didn't think it was appropriate over the football stadium, but then taking the knee wasn't appropriate either. And I'm sure Mr. Heppel et al. Wouldn't have done any of this stuff if there hadn't been this utterly shameful epidemic of kneeling sweeping the Western world. Okay, but I haven't got to what might be the most important part of this article, hidden here, well, almost right at the bottom. They have missed what we're trying to achieve, he says. Mr. Me says. These people need to come into the 21st century and educate themselves. I was particularly impressed by his use of the word educate because I came across that just a couple of days ago when I was reading the transcript of the interview between the Manx radio presenter Stu Peters and the Black Lives Matter supporter just prior to Mr. Peters being suspended for talking back to a black activist. Let's have a look at that transcript. Here we are. This is the conversation Stu Peters had with the caller called Jordan, who said that Peters had been derogatory by saying that all lives matter. Then Jordan starts talking about white privilege and says, I kind of believe that you're an intellectual man. Now, that's his word. It gives me a clue on Stu Peters because I've never heard his show. But I'm assuming from this comment that Peters' delivery is fluent and articulate and that he has good general knowledge. And then Jordan says this prior to slamming down the phone, of course. I hope that you can be saved from your own ignorance, and I encourage you to enlighten yourself. Which looks creepily like that comment from Mr. Me. They should educate themselves. I thought, that's funny. They're coming out with the same sort of catchphrase. Also, Jordan was talking about being saved as if he were describing a religious conversion of some sort. But back to education. You see, there are three words I want to draw to your attention. There's indoctrination and there's learning. Now, no one is in any doubt about the meaning of the word indoctrination. It means you learn a set of principles and you don't deviate from them as handed down by some authority. Then there's learning. That's what happens when someone gives you a set of facts and you assemble them according to your own world view and your own needs. In between, there's educate. Now, education is something that slides between indoctrination and learning, and it always has the extra meaning of an attitude to a set of knowledge, not just the knowledge itself. For instance, if I say, I went to a French school and so I learned in French, that's different from me saying, I went to a French school and I was educated in French. It does mean something different, doesn't it? If I learned in French, it means French was the language the teachers were speaking. If I was educated in French, I was exposed to the whole panoply of French culture, and you assume I could discuss Baudelaire from a French point of view, and likely as not, if I said I was educated at a French school, you'd have an idea that my worldview would be more French than anything else. So if people talk about learning about the difficulties experienced by black people in European countries, well, we can all learn, can't we? But if we're educated about it, that means something else. That's not just knowledge. It's It's an attitude. So I thought I'd do a little search on the words Black Lives Matter and educate yourself. And I found all of this. Black Lives Matter, how white people can get educated. How can I help? Educate yourself with documentaries. Donate and educate yourself. A list of ways to be a better ally. The best anti-racist films and podcasts to educate yourself. What to watch to educate yourself on the Black Lives Matter something or other. Black Lives Matter, 9 documentaries to educate yourself. It goes on and on and on. I thought that was very interesting. So here we have the meaning in this context of the word educate, which is the way the communists used to use it when they referred to their re-education facilities. And what they meant then and what these BLM people mean now is indoctrinate yourself. Give yourself a list of things you have to believe and don't deviate. This is an onslaught against words. They're saying, read all this stuff and then you'll think in a certain way or else. And here, everyone is using the same words because they all think the same thoughts. You can't question it. Black Lives Matter people are using these words, and okay, if that's how they see the world, then that's how they see the world. But people who run football clubs are using the same words. It's as if they all got injected with them while they were asleep. That's what really puzzles me, and I do find that very disturbing. I can't explain it. So I'm not going to even try. I'm just putting that out there for you to think about. And you can work out for yourself what you think is going on. And maybe you can write what you think is going on in the comments. But I want to tell you, it seems to me almost like something out of the Invasion of the Body Snatchers. Right, well, I just want to finish off by telling you about that Black Power salute the footballer was giving in the photo taken just before the football match. I'll put it back up here. Here. You see, I noticed that the caller to the Stu Peters show on his page was using the Black Lives Matter logo, which is this. You see, I recognise that because it's pretty much the same logo as that used by the Black Panthers or the Black Power movement in the 1970s. I tried to find a picture of a vintage poster from that era. I couldn't find a poster, but I did find this badge, which should give you a pretty good idea of what the Black Power fist looked like. The logo that was being used in Douglas didn't have the words Black Lives Matter, but it was using the same fist. And while I looked at it, I immediately thought of the contrast between that fist and this, which most of you will recognise immediately as the hand of the Statue of Liberty. I just want to point out that I have my annoyances with America, and I'm not talking about this as a symbol for America itself, but as a symbol for the ideal that America says it has. And although America frequently, more often than any other time, does fall very far short of that ideal, at least that is the ideal it does have. The hand is holding a torch, which is supposed to, well, a torch gives light, doesn't it? And hope, opportunity, creative fire. It's a guiding beacon. And if you want to go to Britain, one of the great symbols of Britain is on top of the Old Bailey, the Royal Courts of Justice. It's Lady Justice, and her hands are holding in balance a sword and scales, signifying order and balance and an ideal of equality before the law. Again, I'm talking ideals here. And then we have this. It's a fist. It's the wrong way round to be landing a punch, so it isn't in itself an aggressive picture, but it does show preparedness to be aggressive. And even more interesting, it's holding, well, nothing at all. No scales, no torch. It's empty. It's just holding itself. It's just a statement of existence and possibly potential violence. The Black Power movement never became an effective political movement, despite a lot of general sympathy, because in the 1970s, Black people really did have a lot to complain about. So a lot of people were very sympathetic to them, but instead it disintegrated into a factional mess. And thinking back, I suspect it's because it had nothing in its hand but the threat of aggression. Anyway, I thought that was a rather interesting contrast. Why don't you treat yourself or a favoured relative or friend to these magnificent examples of promotional merchandising? The Grannyopteryx t-shirt or the Granbo mug, which comes in 2 flavours, with a firearm or the more deadly knitting needles. And whatever platform you're watching this on, please click like, subscribe and share.